In a village in Cappadocia, in the Greek-speaking heart of the Roman world, two boys stand at a fork in the road. Both are barely 10 years old. Both raised on the same bread, the same hard soil, the same summers working beside their fathers. One turns left, back toward home, toward a table that will feed him well for the rest of his life. Bread, cheese, meat whenever the family can afford it. The other turns right, toward a low gate set into a stone wall, a gate he will not walk back out of for years. Past that gate, he will eat once or twice a day, small portions, and some weeks almost nothing at all. By every rule the modern world takes for granted, that should end badly for the second boy. A growing body starved of calories and protein is supposed to end up smaller, weaker, sicker, and old before its time. Instead, it is the boy behind the gate who will still be alive, still working, still clear-headed, decades after the boy who ate well his whole life has already been buried. How is that possible? This was not a single case. It repeated across the monasteries of the Greek Christian world for centuries, recorded in the monks' own writings, and it is a pattern doctors are only now starting to take seriously. Walk into any clinic today and you will hear the same advice over and over. Eat enough protein or your muscle wastes away. Skip meals and your metabolism slows to protect itself. Undereat for years and you shorten your life, not lengthen it. The monks would have called that madness. Because what they built behind that gate was never starvation. It was a deliberate, 3-part discipline. 1 part for the body, 1 part for the mind, 1 for what they called the soul. And each part only worked because of the one before it. If you want to understand how a boy who ate almost nothing outlived nearly everyone he grew up with, stay with me. Because by the end, you will see exactly how the 3 connect, and why cutting out any one of them breaks the whole thing. Start with the body, because that is where the discipline itself begins. Around 600 years after those 2 boys parted ways, a monk named John, living on a mountain in the Sinai desert, wrote down what generations of monks before him had already been practicing. He called it a ladder, 30 steps climbing toward God. And he chose to place the very first struggle, not at anger, not at pride, but at the stomach. Gluttony, John wrote, was the door. Not a sin sitting on its own, but the entrance every other passion walked through. Anger, greed, envy. In his account, all of them found their opening the moment a man lost the ability to govern something as basic as when, and how much, he ate. So the training started there, and it started slowly, not with a sudden dramatic starving. John warned against that specifically, calling it a fast no man could actually sustain. Instead, meal by meal, year by year, the portion shrank until the body itself adjusted, asking for less because it had genuinely learned to expect less. This is close to what modern doctors would recognize happening under the surface. Go without food for stretches at a time, and the body stops depending on a constant supply arriving from outside. Insulin drops. Stored fat becomes usable fuel instead of sitting locked away. A body trained this way for years learns to run clean on what it already has, instead of demanding to be fed the moment it feels the slightest gap. But the monks were not doing this for a leaner waist. A bishop named Basil, from that same Cappadocian region those 2 boys came from, made this explicit in a sermon to his own congregation. He asked them directly, did they not know that trainers, before a big race, deliberately kept their horses hungry? A horse fed heavy runs slow and heavy. A horse kept lean and slightly hungry runs sharp. Fasting, Basil told them, was the same discipline an athlete uses before a real contest, training the body under real pressure, not comfort. And it was never fasting on a body left idle. The same monks who limited their food also worked the land behind those walls, hauling water, farming narrow terraces, building with their own hands. A body doing nothing and eating nothing is simply starving. A body doing real work while eating little is training. exactly the way Basil described it. That is the first piece. A body taught, gradually, to run on less, and to keep working while it did. But there was a second reason these monks trusted hunger with their bodies, and it had nothing to do with training. Basil pointed out something the physicians of his own time already practiced. When a man fell seriously ill, doctors did not force food into him. They had him abstain and go hungry, rather than fill his stomach with anything and everything. The logic was plain enough, even without a laboratory. A body fighting to heal itself has limited resources. Force it to also digest a heavy meal, and you are asking it to fight 2 battles instead of 1. So fasting, to these monks, was never only a discipline for the strong. It was treated as a kind of medicine for the weak, a way of getting out of the body's way long enough for it to do its own repair work. Centuries later, scientists would find a real mechanism behind exactly that idea. A fasting body activates a cellular cleanup process, clearing out damaged components and recycling them. Discovery important enough to earn a Nobel Prize once it was finally understood. The monks had no name for it. They only had the outcome, watched and recorded, generation after generation. But a strong, well-tended body was never the point on its own. Because once the stomach stopped shouting for attention, something else in these men changed, and this is where the discipline stops being only about the body at all. Basil said this plainly to his own congregation too. Overindulge, he warned, and the mind wastes away while the body grows heavy. The reasoning was simple. A mind occupied with digestion cannot occupy itself with anything else. An empty stomach was never treated as a problem in these communities. It was treated as the price of a clear head. And there was real precedent behind that claim, one these men would have known well from their own scriptures. Basil pointed to Elijah, whose 40 days without food were said to prepare him to witness something no ordinary man could see. He pointed to Daniel, who Basil argued would never have received his visions on a full stomach. The pattern these monks inherited was old. Strip away the noise of appetite, and perception itself sharpens. Here is a question worth asking yourself. How much of your own day is spent thinking clearly, and how much of it is spent a little foggy, a little heavy, an hour or 2 after your last meal? Modern neuroscience did not set out to prove a 4th century bishop right, but it largely has. Deprived of a steady stream of food, the brain shifts part of its fuel supply toward ketones, and research links extended gaps between meals to increases in a protein that helps the brain form new connections. None of that language existed in Cappadocia. What existed was the observation, repeated for generations, that the mind worked differently, sharper and steadier, once the stomach stopped asking for anything. If you want the complete version of this, not just how these monks trained their bodies and minds, but how the whole system of ancient discipline, food, work, recovery, and focus fits together as one design for living, that is exactly what the art of living, like a man, lays out in full. Link is in the description. So the body learned to run on less. The mind, freed from constantly managing digestion, grew quieter and sharper. That left one piece, the one these monks would have said mattered most of all, and the one that ties the other 2 together. They called it the soul, and to them, the whole discipline existed for its sake. Every meal skipped, every hour of hunger endured while still working the fields, was practice, not punishment, but training in refusing what the body demanded, the same way a man trains a muscle by demanding more of it than it's used to. Master that refusal in something as constant and basic as hunger, and every other form of self-command becomes possible. Anger, envy, fear, desire, all of them, in the monk's own account, are easier to govern once the simplest and most frequent appetite of all has already been brought under control. Think about how often the average day actually tests you. Someone cuts you off. A message goes unanswered. A plan falls apart. Those tests are occasional, unpredictable, easy to be caught off guard by. Hunger tests you on a schedule, every single day, several times, for as long as you live. A boy who learns to answer that test calmly for years on end walks into every other test in life having already rehearsed the exact same response 1,000 times over. This is the piece the two boys at that fork in the road could not have understood at 10 years old. One of them was about to spend his life managing a body that answered to every craving the moment it appeared. The other was about to spend his life training a body, a mind and a will that answered to none of them automatically. Three things built on top of each other, none of them possible without the one before it. And this is where the story stops being philosophy and becomes something you can actually measure. Monasteries built on exactly this discipline are still standing today, some of them occupied without interruption for well over 1,000 years, and the men living in them now follow close to the same calendar those Cappadocian monks helped establish, eating simply, fasting roughly half the days of the year, working the land by hand, exactly as the boy behind that gate would have. When researchers finally studied communities living this way, they recorded some of the lowest rates of heart disease and cancer found anywhere on the continent, and a striking number of men living well past 90, still walking the same mountain paths their much younger brothers walk today. Separate studies tracking people who kept the same fasting calendar for a single year found measurable drops in cholesterol by the time each fasting period ended, the kind of number a 4th century bishop had no instrument to measure, but would not have been surprised by in the slightest. None of those men were fasting for their cholesterol, any more than John or Basil were writing about heart disease. They were doing what that second boy did at the gate, training the body first, so the mind could quiet down, so the will could fuddly be his own. The long life was never the goal. It was only ever the receipt. Go back to that fork in the road, dust still settling behind two boys who had no idea what they were actually choosing, and look at it once more, now that you know what each one was walking toward. One walked toward a life that answered to appetite, the same way most lives still do. The other walked toward a life spent training it. The body first, then the mind, then the will behind both, each one only possible because of the one before it. Skip the first, and there's nothing to build the second on. Skip the second, and the discipline is just deprivation, with no clarity attached. Skip the third, and you have a diet, not a life. Only. The boy who kept all three walked out the far side of a full life, still standing, still working, still clear-headed, decades after the boy who never once had to say no to anything had already been carried out of the village for the last time. So, ask yourself the same question those two boys never got to. If your body answered to nothing but its own appetite for the next 50 years, what would be left of you by the end of it? The ancient way exists to recover what was lost. If this changed how you look at your next meal, you already know what to do.